90s, to me, was such an important era in everything, from music, movies, style, just anything. I feel like the 90s really laid the groundwork for the vast majority of what people experience today. We're past the point, we're not in thrift shops anymore. We're not going to Value Village and picking our stuff. We're beyond that. It looks the same, but it's not copy and paste. Like, we didn't all go to the same store and buy the same shirt and the same pants. I think there's so much cool stuff to pull from it. I think there's so much diversity in the way people can style themselves and create, you know, who they are. But I would love to see Wildrose Vintage grow right alongside with the thrift community, because we're here for it. Wildrose Vintage was born out of a passion for music tees and vintage band shirts, I guess, is kind of where the business side of it came from. A few friends and myself, we were into skiing, and at the time, this would have been like 2009, 2010, we wanted the kind of 80s look, that neon, the onesie type skiing stuff, and we figured Value Village was the only place to get that. So it started there, and eventually we kept going because the kids in the ski community really liked what we were wearing and what we were bringing. And it got to the point where eventually we were kind of selling that. I was selling that, and I was also selling other clothing at the time. Eventually it just kept growing and growing all through like the mid 2010s, and eventually I kind of connected with people on Instagram. Some guys were like, hey, you got like some really cool shirts. I got these really cool shirts too. Do you want to trade? And we started trading, and I kind of became interweaved in this community that was very heavily based in California, of all places. Now that I was kind of settled into a career, I'm like, I need something to stimulate me on the side. And I started looking at the shirts I had and the people that I was connected with. I started kind of flipping some of those shirts, and then I was like, well, I think there's a deeper or more that I could be doing here. I started a market, and in the what would that be, 2020, I hosted the biggest vintage market that the city had ever seen, and from there I just kind of started growing and growing. And at the time I was under Wildrose Vintage, and I figured, you know what, let's take a swing at this. From there it's just evolved into what it was. So from, you know, collecting Slipknot shirts in 2010 to owning a store on Whyte Ave. For me, Whyte Avenue has been kind of the hub for everything, always. Growing up, it was where I just wanted to be all the time. Foosh, which still stands and is probably one of the longest standing stores on Whyte Avenue, and is kind of just, they're the guys who kind of have cultivated all of our interest in streetwear, because I think that this kind of all boils down to streetwear, no matter what you're wearing, and just personal style. If I was going to open a store, it had to be on Whyte Avenue. You know, the mall sucks. And you know, at the time, 124th Street really wasn't what it is yet. I think 124 is pretty cool, but there was no other option. It was Whyte Avenue or bust. You know, when I was in high school, kids would make fun of you because you shopped at Value Village. Now you're not cool if you don't shop at Value Village. You know, I was teaching junior high for up until this year, and that was like the cool thing kids were doing, where, you know, when I was in junior high school, you were not cool if you went to the thrift store. So it has changed. It is completely 360 to 180 or whatever. And I think that it's going to continue to grow. I think people are very conscious of, you know, the impact of buying stuff from places that, you know, can turn out thousands of pieces in a 24-hour span. I think people are very aware of, you know, who's manufacturing that, in terms of, you know, they're underfunded, they're taking advantage of people. Whereas, you know, this thrifted stuff, it's so much more sustainable, right? That's kind of the buzzword around all of this, and it's also cool. You can find really, really cool stuff and one-of-a-kind stuff. Whereas these people who wear designer clothing and in that world, you know, there's 5 of you, you show up to a party and you're all wearing the same thing, right? You can really develop a unique style, and you can really carve your own path with it, or you can follow trends with it, because, and I think when you follow a trend with thrifted clothing, we all have pants and shirts that look alike, but it's all different in its own sense. And I think that that's one thing that thrifting has, and that what people see in it. The self-expression is what people are chasing of in the 90s, and I love that, right? You know, the 90s was pivotal for, you know, people making moves towards expressing themselves in different ways. Not that the 80s and 70s weren't, and there's, you know, monumental events there, but I just feel like the 90s had that edge to it that people miss. And I'm all for it. I think it's great. I always joke, the stuff, like if you come in the shop and you see all the stuff in the shop, right? From the movies to the N64 to the toys on the shelves, all that stuff, I always make the joke that it's all the stuff I wish I had as a kid that my parents wouldn't buy me. I consume a lot of media, from music to I watch a lot of movies, I do all that, and it's everything kind of stems from that moment in time, in that decade there. That was so important to me growing up, and it was such a cool time in life. So I focus on what is important to me. The self-expression is what people are chasing of in the 90s, and I love that. I feel like Edmonton was missing that for a long time. We didn't have a lot of that. I don't think people felt comfortable enough to express themselves through style. And if we can slow down, you know, brands like fast fashion brands and everything like that, I think that it's super positive. So I would love to say that, you know, thrifting is going to continue to grow. I think it's been around long enough to say that it's safe to say that it's going to continue to evolve and grow. I hope that Wildrose Vintage continues to be a key player in that for the Edmonton people who want to continue with choosing secondhand clothing. So, I mean, you know, it might take some evolving on our end in terms of what we bring in, and I might have to sacrifice some things, and it might not be just what I think is cool anymore. I have to listen to the youth a little bit. There's an interview with some famous rapper or something, and he talks about how he loves vintage clothing solely because he goes to a party and he can almost guarantee there's no one else wearing the same thing as him. Wildrose Vintage, you know, the clothing that we're getting, it's curated in that regard, right? You know, we're making sure that what you're getting is the best of the best, and we really work hard to make sure that we are bringing the best vintage clothing to the city, and I firmly stand behind the fact that I think we do bring the best vintage clothing that Edmonton has to offer. And we're not getting our stuff for free either. A lot of people think it comes for free. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and we touch a lot of really gross clothing to get you what you need. And kind of my motto going into Wildrose Vintage and everything was always, I'm gonna put out there what I think is cool, and if people are into it, fantastic. If they're not, so be it.